It's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is alternate. Let's take a moment and look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear alternate used is to mean to do something or perform something or for something to occur in turn repeatedly. You might sort of think of that idea of kind of like back and forth, back and forth. A second way the verb alternate gets used is to mean to change repeatedly between two contrasting conditions. We're going to see some different examples of both of these usages a little bit later in the video, but for now, I want you to know that alternate is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all we need to do is drop the E on the end and then add ing to form alternating. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by just adding the letter D, since this verb already ends in an E. Now, our base verb, alternate, ends with a T sound. This means that the ed or past tense ending is going to make an id sound, and we're going to add an extra syllable to the word when we say it. It should sound like this: alternated, alternated. Now, you might encounter a couple phrasal verbs with our verb of the day, and we'll discuss them now. The first that you might hear is to alternate between. Again, it goes back to that idea of switching between two or more different people or things. An example of this might be, he's been alternating between burning up and freezing today. In this sentence, my mind immediately goes to, oh, someone is sick. They're not feeling so well because at one moment they're, oh my gosh, I'm so hot. And then the next moment they're so cold, right? So they're switching kind of between these two extremes. Another phrasal verb you might encounter is to alternate with. This can have a couple meanings. One would be to share some role or task with another person. An example of this might be the two moderators will alternate questions with each other. Okay? You might see the word or hear the word moderator in connection to debates, where we kind of have a person who's going to ask questions, is going to sort of watch time, give everyone a chance to ask, but here we have two, right? So one moderator will ask a question, then the other will ask the second question, and they will go back and forth. So they're sharing that role or that responsibility. A second way to use alternate with is to mean that something is appearing repetitively with something else. An example of this might be, I alternate green backgrounds with purple ones each week. I've actually had this question asked a couple times in my videos. Why these particular colors? And the answer is that it matched a logo for a tutoring company that I used to operate more regularly. But you might notice each week, videos this week are, of course, green in background, right? The videos I make the following week or next week will have a purple, right? So, and we'll go back and forth, green, purple, okay? Now let's continue practicing our verb of the day. And today we're going to practice the simple present and the present perfect progressive. Let's begin by discussing the simple present. We use this verb tense to talk about our habits and routines. These are actions that repeat with a certain level of frequency or consistency. Right? These might be actions we do every day or 2 times a week, maybe once a month. You might also hear the simple present used with facts as well. The key to making sentences in the simple present is to pay attention to your subject. If your subject is I, you, we, or they, in the affirmative, you're just going to use that base verb. But if the subject is he, she, or it, you're going to add an S to the end of the verb. Okay? Let's take a look at an affirmative example. The two students in the class alternate reading paragraphs. Okay? So that would be that idea of sort of taking turns. And this actually happens in one of my classes right now. I just have 2 students, and so I might ask student 1, right, read this first paragraph, student 2, read paragraph 2, and then back to student 1 for paragraph 3, and so on and so on. We're alternating. Okay. Now, if you want to make a negative sentence in the simple present, again, we've got to pay attention to the subject. If the subject is I, you, we, or they, we're going to use do not and then the base verb. If the subject is he, she, or it, we'll use does not and then the base verb. You might also hear the contractions don't or doesn't. They have the exact same meaning. An example of this might be, the temperature doesn't alternate between extremes here. Right? So we might be describing a place that has a pretty consistent climate. It doesn't get really, really hot and then really, really cold. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple present. To do this, I start with do or does, then I'm going to have my subject, and then the base verb. I always like to point out to my students, notice the only time I'm adding S to the end of the verb is in the affirmative with he, she, or it. So an example of this might be, do you alternate between Tylenol and Motrin when your kids are running a fever? So maybe the phrase running a fever is new for you, right? It would be a very warm or high temperature, indicating that your body is fighting some type of illness. And for some people, they've received this advice of you take a little bit of Tylenol, then you use Motrin, right? And you change back and forth. Now, I know there are some medical professionals that say don't do that. You should absolutely talk to your doctor. You should never take medical advice from an English teacher. Now, let's move on and talk about the present perfect progressive or the present perfect continuous. Some teachers and textbooks use that term, present perfect continuous. It means exactly the same thing as the present perfect progressive. With this verb tense, we're talking about actions that started in the past and they're continuing into the present. They might even continue on into the future. Many times the focus with present perfect progressive sentences are on how long the particular action has been ongoing. The reason I like saying present perfect progressive is that you can see 3 P's as part of the name of that verb tense. And the 3 P's can help you remember that you are also going to need 3 parts to make your verb. Now, we have to pay attention to our subject, okay? So if our subject is I, you, we, or they, then we're going to use have. That's our first part. Then we're going to use the participle been, that's the second part, and then we use our verb with an ing ending. If the subject is he, she, or it, I'm going to use has, then been, and then the ing form of the verb. Okay? So the present aspect of this is our have or has. Okay? So you can see this in my first example sentence. The coach has been alternating between the 2 goalies. So maybe we could be talking about soccer, football. We could also be talking about hockey or maybe some other sport. But this idea of maybe in the first game, goalie number 1 plays. Next game, goalie 2. Then back to goalie 1 in the third game, and so on and so forth. Okay? Let's talk about making negative present perfect progressive sentences. To do this, again, you pay attention to the subject and you use have or has, followed by not, then the participle been, and then the ing form the verb. You might also hear have not combined into haven't or has not combined into hasn't. An example of this might be, they aren't alternating turns in hosting holiday celebrations. This is something that many families will do. I know this happened a lot in my family. Maybe my mom would have our extended family over for Thanksgiving, and then one of my aunts would have people over for Christmas. And then a different aunt would host Easter. And it would go kind of like that and kind of back and forth. And maybe my grandmothers would be involved, but we would switch or take turns. Okay. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the present perfect progressive. To do this, I start with have or has, whichever form matches my subject. That subject comes next. Then I use the participle been, and then the ing form the verb. Here's another example. Have you been alternating between sources of protein? Okay, so here, again, we're back to that idea of maybe one day I have fish, and then another day tofu or something of that, right? Where you're taking turns, switching back and forth. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words that are related to our verb alternate. And you might have noticed in this video, as I've pronounced the verb, the last syllable, alternate, has a long A sound. And the first couple words we're going to look at here are going to have the same spelling, but they're going to have a different pronunciation. So the first word we're looking at here is the noun alternate. So it's more like a short I in that last syllable of the word. Alternate, alternate. Okay? When we use this word as a noun, we're referring to a person who is acting as some type of replacement, a substitute, or some type of alternative. An example of this might be, she is the first alternate for the spelling bee. Okay, so this is something that happens in a lot of elementary schools here in the United States, where we have a little competition of who can spell the most words or be the best. Right? So many times one person from a class moves on and competes against other students at the same grade level, maybe from other schools. So the winner from the class might be the representative, right? But you have to have an alternate, a person who's willing to step in case the first person is not able to go. And that's what that sentence is describing. Now, the same pronunciation, alternate, can be used as an adjective. Okay? And when we use it as an adjective, we're generally describing something that is happening or following in turns. That's one way to use it. An example of this might be, he is on call in alternate months of the year. Okay, so on call might be you have to come in and work in an emergency situation. So in this sentence, maybe this person is responsible for doing that in the months of January, March, and then May, and so forth, right? So we're skipping each month. Another way to use the adjective alternate is to describe something that is served or used in place of something else. You might hear someone say something like, we need an alternate plan, right? We need essentially this is going to be like a replacement used in place of. One last word for us to look at today, it's the adverb alternately. So notice I'm keeping that same short I pronunciation. In the second to last syllable, I've just added the ly suffix, which is commonly used to make an adjective an adverb. The adverb alternately means that we're describing two things that are being done, following and succeeding each other. An example of this might be, having young children is alternately exciting and incredibly exhausting. So here we're describing someone who maybe has this feeling of, young children are wonderful, right? And then a minute later, maybe an hour later, they're like, oh my goodness, having young children is so tiring, right? And then another moment, that's so much fun. I love it. I'm so happy. And then back to, oh, I'm tired, right? So the idea here is those feelings are following each other in kind of a repetitive pattern. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.